Sure, no problem. Let's go ahead and do something in 1/72nd scale. I love taking requests. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with something that is completely and utterly different from my usual routine, and that is a model showcase video for this 1/72nd scale USS Skipjack fast attack submarine. And yes, you indeed heard me correctly. This is not some weird alternate universe, although for this video I'm going to be wearing blue gloves. And unlike my normal content, which are basically tanks and other ground military vehicles, for this one here, I went ahead and went outside my comfort zone and built something way different, which is a nuclear-powered submarine. The model that you see here is built for my own personal collection. It's not for sale and or purchase. However, like I typically mention in my videos, I often take on commission build projects for models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. However, those are exclusively military vehicles, namely things like tanks, armored cars, things along those lines. This video here, obviously it's a submarine, and I am not offering any build commission services for models like this or any other type of warships and or planes. So this one here, guys, is just basically a one-off, so just sit back and enjoy the video. However, if anyone out there has a project that they want me to work on that is in my usual subject matter, feel free to contact me through the email address listed below, which is, you guessed it, info@eastcoastarmory.com. This model here is built predominantly out of the box. However, I went ahead and added a few custom upgrades to it here or there. We'll be going over all of these additions in this video, along with giving the model a thorough in-box review. So stay tuned, because there's going to be a lot of content coming right at you. Digging right in, I'm pretty sure most of my subscribers are completely surprised I went ahead and made this video that we have here. As most people know, I am a die-hard tank fan, but believe it or not, I do have an interest in submarines, although it's not necessarily one that is that large, but it is an interest that I have nonetheless. Believe it or not, when I first started building models, probably one of my first model kits that I ever built was a Revell lionfish. To start this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this is the USS Skipjack, specifically SSN-585. The Skipjack was a very important submarine design that was developed after the World War II time frame. This design was so influential that basically it set forth the submarine designs that the United States Navy would incorporate with their submarines all the way up till today. This vessel here was really the end result of two technologies that were fused together. The first, of course, is the nuclear reactor, which was carried over from the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine. However, although the Nautilus had the nuclear power plant, the design of the exterior hull was a conventional type format, which the United States Navy were utilizing on their submarines all the way back when they first adopted the USS Holland. Also, around the early 1950s time frame, the U.S. Navy commissioned a new submarine known as the USS Albacore. The Albacore was completely revolutionary with the design of its hull. Rather than using the conventional type design that was used on the other vessels, the Albacore was the first American submarine to utilize the teardrop-shaped hull. With this design, this vessel was able to achieve great speeds underwater, which were far superior to the other legacy vessels that came before it. This new vessel had its keel laid down at the Electric Boat Shipyard in Groton, Connecticut on the 29th of May, 1956. It was eventually launched on the 26th of May in 58, and eventually commissioned on the 15th of April in 1959. Although the vessel is as old as it is, the Navy isn't exactly very forthcoming in disclosing its stats with speed as well as depth. However, it's estimated that the Skipjack can go about 20 knots on the surface and about 31 knots underwater. Along with the Skipjack, the Navy went ahead and ordered 5 more boats of the Skipjack class, with the complement in total being 6. All of these vessels were completed and saw service with the U.S. Navy. One of them sadly was lost, being the USS Scorpion. The USS Skipjack served with the U.S. Navy for about 31 years, eventually being decommissioned in 1990. That same year, it was stricken off of the Navy registry, and then the ex-USS Skipjack was sent up to Puget Sound to enter into the nuclear ship recycling program. Although none of the Skipjack class submarines are still around today, the legacy of this class of vessel was very important because, like I stated earlier, this vessel here set the mold and the template for how the US Navy was going to design their submarines from this point onward. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/72nd scale USS Skipjack kit from Moebius. Believe it or not, this is a kit that I've always wanted to get, and it's one that I personally have always found to be very, very interesting. These kits here were released by Moebius back in 2012, so they are a relatively recent release, but obviously at the time of filming this video, we're getting close to the 10-year mark. This kit here was released around the time when the interest in 1/72nd scale submarine kits were actually pretty popular. This all stems back, of course, to the early 2000s time frame when Revell Germany tooled up their Type 7C U-boat, followed by Revell themselves tooling up a 1/72nd scale American Gato class kit. Both of those kits were a huge success and are actually very nicely done. All throughout the 2000s time frame, you saw a wide range of 1/72nd scale submarines coming out from different companies, consisting of mainly World War II era submarines, like several versions of the Type 23, the Type 2. Mostly a lot of World War II U-boats were released around that time. Of course, the biggest stain of this era was the release of the Lindbergh 1/72nd scale I-class, which was a complete utter dumpster fire, and should be put in history on what happens when you hire a person who has no idea what they're doing to design your kits, but that's something I could rail against in a whole video in its own right. But in 2012, Moebius decided to throw their hat into the 1/72nd scale submarine with the release of the USS Skipjack. This was a very interesting release in its own right because all the other kits I just mentioned were all World War II class of submarines, while the Skipjack here was the first post-World War II and was also the first nuclear-powered submarine offered in this scale. What's also interesting was that this kit here was developed by the company Moebius. Moebius is known to be a plastic model company that primarily makes re-releases of the old vintage Aurora monster kits from the 1960s. On top of the old Aurora re-releases, they are also known to create models in a similar format from other science fiction related material. For instance, they made the Seaview from the TV show Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, as well as also the robot from Lost in Space. Even the name and the logo are very reminiscent to their science fiction background. The logo itself is heavily inspired from the old Aurora oval type logos, and the name Moebius of course comes from the science fiction movie Forbidden Planet. Which is why the release of this kit here was very surprising because it's outside of their standard range of plastic model kits that they've offered in the past. However, this kit here is not too much of a deviation from Moebius' traditional lineup because Aurora themselves did release a USS Skipjack kit back in the 1960s. That kit, however, is much smaller and simpler compared to this 1/72nd scale beast over here. That kit came in at around 1/230-ish in scale. However, I will say that that kit had one of the most beautiful box arts of the era and, well, even to today. I'm going to go ahead and throw up the box art of the original Aurora kit because it is literally one of my top 5 favorite box arts of all time. The quality of the illustrations are gorgeous and I love the overall execution. You have the Skipjack tied at the dock, which at the time was cutting edge technology, and in the background you have about 2 or 3 Guppy converted US fleet boats that are also tied up to their mooring lines. It has a nice contrast between the new and the old, and it's just a composition that is extremely well executed. But again, these are the old Aurora kits of the era, and that's nothing that's uncommon because the artist that they hired at the time was really at the top of his game. Back to this kit over here. This kit is made with entirely new tooling and has absolutely nothing related to the old school tooling from the 1960s. This kit itself would be later re-released by Revell Germany, and that kit was the exact same tooling as this one here, but from what I've read, just has a slight option with the decals that are supplied. More than likely, you could build that submarine in 1 or 2 different configurations just by swapping out the numbers. I also want to point out that the distribution for this kit here is more or less geared for the United States, while the Revell kit is more commonly found in Europe. This kit over here I was able to pick up from Amazon.com, and actually I got it for free because I had some credit card points saved on hand, so I decided, you know what, let me go ahead and splurge a little bit for a kit for myself. The kits themselves normally retail for about $150 or possibly a little less US dollars. The Revell kits are also somewhat easy to come by, but you're going to find them more or less on eBay, and generally the vendor is going to be overseas. Again, more likely due to the distribution rights that Revell has for the same kit. One warning I want to put out there is that if anyone does encounter the Revell one in the wild, make sure that you don't overpay for the model, because the kit itself is the exact same tooling, but a lot of individuals think that, well, because it's Revell Germany, that means the tooling is probably better compared to the one here on the American release. This was something that I was also seen back in the day on the Gato releases. Revell Monogram released the USS Gato kit in the United States. Then a year or two later, Revell Germany released the exact same kit, just with a slightly different box art, in the European market. Many of those kits wound back up in the United States and were actually double the price of the American counterpart. A lot of individuals out there believe that because it's Revell Germany, it's got better tooling in it. And sadly, if you believe that, well, you got had, or it's just a massive placebo effect, because the kit inside the box is literally the same kit. So bear that in mind if you are out in the wild and you see one of these kits. Don't overpay for them. With the cellophane removed, you can see the box art now in better light. The box art itself is very reminiscent to the older kits that were released by Aurora back in the 1960s. This is specifically true with the usage of the typography that we have here for the main title as well as the subtitle, as well as with the main illustration itself. The illustration with the color palette alone is extremely reminiscent to the older kits that were released back in the day. The quality of the illustration is also not bad. The details are there. And again, something like this would be more or less seen on more vintage kits. I personally would have preferred to see the original Aurora box art found on this section over here, but that's really just me playing favoritism. First, it takes us to the Mobius logo. I already touched upon that before, as well as some other verbiage that we have written over here. Obviously, it's 1/72 scale. Unassembled plastic model kit. It is 42 inches long, which is pretty substantial. However, compared to an American World War II fleet boat, it's actually quite tiny. Super detailed, well, that remains to be seen when I crack the box open. Skill level 3, I'm pretty sure I'm past that point. And the thing is for ages 15 and up. Well, I have the maturity level of a 13-year-old, but I think I should be able to be just fine. On the side portion over here, we have the sample illustration. Same illustration, obviously, on the box. The color palette is, again, same as what I mentioned before, but the typography is nicely laid out, I will say that. Here we have the side panel. Obviously, it's a mirror image on the opposite side, and nothing really much to talk about over here. One thing that is really interesting about this kit, however, is that the back panel, they went ahead and gave it some more graphic design as opposed to just leaving it with its white backing. Here we have a nice profile shot of the sub along with the top view, front, and rear. And what's really cool is that this acts as a nice color palette to help people with their painting of the model. We have some other verbiage found on here, which includes several of the features that the Submarine kit has, like it's 42 inches long. What's pretty interesting, this caught my eye, is that the kit does have photo etch detailing. This is something that is really, really good, and normally in the past it would have to be acquired via an aftermarket source. I will say that one thing does kind of stick out to me, and it's a bit of a dubious thing, is when they say over here, model is convertible to radio control. That is true, but there's an asterisk to that. In order to convert this to radio control, that is possible, but for this kit over here, it's not as easy as it makes it out to be. It's not like one of those ready-to-run submarine kits that are designed from the get-go to be RC. This one here, it's more or less a static kit that you can convert to RC, and there is a difference between the two. However, on a similar note, I will say that the radio-controlled submarine community absolutely loved this kit and met it with open arms. Prior to the release of this kit here, if you wanted a radio-controlled Skipjack class submarine, your only two options were to track down some kind of vintage garage fiberglass kit like from Scale Shipyard, or your other option was to track down the vacuum form combat models kit, which, if anyone knows a thing about vacuum form, you'll know that it's basically despised in just about every single modeling genre under the sun. I also want to add that if you go ahead and go on YouTube and look for this kit over here, you're going to find a plethora of videos of individuals who RC converted this model, and many of them have done fantastic jobs with them. I recommend checking it out. The videos are actually pretty good. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and crack this one open. This one here opens up from the side panel, which is relatively rare these days, more or less common on some older kits. It's definitely true for tank kits, but obviously with this subject matter here, well, all bets are off. Okay, we have an inner white liner. And let's go ahead and pop this thing open. Ooh, look at that. Everything is molded in this gray color plastic. This is very similar to the Mobius Seaview submarine kit that my father actually built a number of years ago, and the quality of tooling is basically on par with that. Makes sense, both these kits really came out around the same time. Starting with this runner over here, we have the majority of the sail components. This is the top portion of the conning tower. Note the integrally molded panel lines. The remainder of the runner consists of the various array components. We have the attack scope, the night scope, the ECM mast, as well as the rear induction valve. I'll touch upon what that is later on in this video, but it's pretty cool. Here we have obviously the main propeller. The propeller looks to be of some really nice quality moldings. There is an aftermarket one out there that's made out of brass. It's an exquisite piece, but for this kit here, the kit supply one should be suffice. Also on this runner, I see several of the dive planes, which consisted of 2 found on the sail, as well as the other ones found on the rear portion of the hull. Moving on to the next bag takes us to the sail and or the conning tower. This tower here is quite clearly a Skipjack class submarine tower due to that nice elongated tail section found aft of the tower. As for what this is, well, this is nothing more than a cover for the diesel induction valve, but I'll mention more of that as the video progresses. The remainder of the details are there, namely the hatches that put you directly over the dive planes, as well as the other access panels and hatches that are found on this pattern of submarine. The panels are engraved, but they're relatively simplistic in their overall detailing. I'm not seeing any fasteners on them, but then again, these towers were pretty smooth in their overall texturing. This is quite of a contrast compared to some of the other contemporaries, namely the guppy pattern or the guppy converted fleet boats of the time, like the electric boat step sail, the Portsmouth step sail, as well as the Atlantic high sail. Those were all made from fiberglass and were actually riveted together. On the Skipjack here, I believe it may have been metal, but I'm a little hazy on that. Of course, if any USN vets are watching this and know, feel free to put that in the comment description listed below. In addition to the tower, in that bag was also the components for the stand. Just like all submarine kits or ship kits in general, you get a basic stand with the model. Not quite sure if I'm going to use it or if I'm going to cobble something together out of wood, but we'll see as the video progresses. Going down deeper takes us to really some more of the meat and potatoes of this sub, and these are the main hull sections, and you can see exactly how big these sections are going to be once they are fully assembled. It's also quite clear why this sub is such a popular candidate for RC conversion. With the portion out of the bag, this is the lower bow area. Note the sonar section, as well as the torpedo tubes that are integrally molded in. The crisp details are still present, and we do have some of the floodgate detailing found on the lower portion. This is a very nice touch, and it's one that's commonly overlooked on some older generation of submarine kits. This hole over here is for the stand, and it's something that, like I said before, I might patch up and plug up, but we'll see as the build continues. The gratings are molded solid, as you can see. If you're building this as a radio control submarine, I believe this is something you might want to address because you do need to have free flooding going on in here, much along the same way as the real one, specifically if you're going with a WT system, which is realistically what everyone uses when they RC convert one of these boats. I'm not sure what's on the market, if they have these in photo etch or possibly in 3D print, but you know, I'm pretty sure if there's a will, there's a way, and there's probably a detail part out there for you. The quality of the plastic, I should be touching back upon that, is nice and thick, which is great. The piece is nice and durable. It's not going to warp on you, and it's just, you know, indicative of good quality moldings. Here we have the lower rear portion. Again, more of those great type details. Some other sections molded into the hull, and I believe these are for the photo etch that was mentioned on the box, but we'll see. Here we have the interior. Pretty vacant in here. Obviously this would be a great location to mount your WTC, but there are better videos that go into that more depth than I possibly can. Rear dive planes. This is where your prop would go. And by the way, I do want to touch upon one thing when it said before it can be converted to radio control. Obviously, that's not necessarily the case, because if you're going to RC convert this, you're going to have to chew and remove all this material out, as well as modify the rudder here to have a ring type system to work around your dive planes, because again, you have a central mounted prop shaft, and yet you still have to have control over the dive planes, and there's linkages in here. with that drive shaft in the way, it can cause some problems, specifically with the way the kit is designed, with the way everything links together. But again, they mentioned on the box, and I just want to touch upon that. It's not as easy as they make it seem out to be. RC sub guys look at this and they laugh all day, specifically anyone in the subcommittee. But if you're just a rando looking into building an RC sub, it's not going to be as easy as you think. But again, there are lots of resources out there that can easily help you go to the next step. So I would recommend checking those out. Removing the other two sections from the bag, here we have a nice little foam insert, which is nice, keeps the pieces from getting scratched up. The other portions had them too, I might add, and the model itself is well packed. So if you buy one of these kits, chances are really good you're going to get it in one piece. Just like with the lower sections, the tops are nice and durably molded. They're nice and thick. Here we have the remainder of the details found on the top portion. Note the front sonar section, and there is this line running across. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this is actually your water line. A lot of kits, they would have a guide molded in, so you know exactly put your tape line. Not really a fan of that per se, but we'll see how that turns out as the build progresses. On the top here, we have what's known specifically in this place as a zigzag. This is used to clip sailors onto the deck. If I'm not mistaken, it's an either or situation. This is, I believe, if the submarine is on the surface and the crews are on deck, they clip themselves to this rail over here, and it prevents them from falling overboard. It's basically like a harness. And I believe it's also used underwater for divers of one flavor or another, who can clip themselves and work along the the top portions here of the deck. This little detailing was found on just about all post-war submarines. A lot of the old World War II boats were upgraded with this system, and it's also still seen today on such classes as the Los Angeles, the Ohio, the Seawolf, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Virginias have them too, so keep that in mind. Moving our way to the aft section, you can see more of the molded in details. This here is the buoy, by the way. It's this oval shape, and this was a common thing found on post-World War II U.S. submarine classes. And here we have the hatch, and what's nice is this company actually went ahead and rendered this hatch for a 1/72nd scale human, as opposed to the moron who designed the Lindbergh I-class, where the hatch is the size of a missile silo. So, you know, that's what happens when you use a qualified individual to design your molds, and masters for that matter. Anyway, that little quick rant out of the way. The sub itself seems to be again, decent quality all the way around, and I'm actually looking pretty forward to starting this one. Digging down deeper takes us to this little bag that we have here. The bag is in two pouches. The first pouch consists of clear plastic components, which are obviously used for the front windows that we have on the sail, as well as what appears to be a nav light of some sort, but we'll see as the build progresses. And the next pouch over here contains bits of photo etch. The photo etch is actually very good quality. The metal is nice and thick. It has some really good detailing on it for the fasteners. These ones here are completely perforated, which is, again, a nice touch. And the best part is it's not on a runner, so you don't have any deburring or removal to worry about. And one not issue, but one thing to watch out with photo etch is that when you're removing things off of a sprue, because you're cutting the metal, a lot of times the section will get bent slightly, and then you have to, eke it back and fix it. And it comes with the territory when working with photo etch. It's not a problem, but with these over here, you don't even have to deal with any of that because, well, they're already done for you. So good on Mobius for using this design. Well, with very little help from the dullest fizzer on this side of the Mississippi, I was able to barely get this bag open. So we have here a decal sheet, and what's nice is you can build just about every single variant of the Skipjack class, from the Skipjack, the Scamp, the ill-fated Scorpion, which in order to do that you do have to make some modifications to the conning tower, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I've brushed up on my sub stuff, but anyway, that's still pretty cool that they do supply you with this decal sheet. We also have here the depth gauges that are for the side of the hull as well as on the rear of the rudder. And the names are just decals, and I believe on this sub here that might be okay. I know on some older submarines the name was actually pieces of steel that were riveted to the side or possibly welded to the side of the fairwater, or not the fairwater, to the side of the hull. But on these ones here, that just might be painted on, so I'm a little hazy on that, and of course I'll do some research to see if that's the case, but more information on that is to follow. Well, the last thing in the box is, of course, the instruction manual. It appears to be a nice full color manual, which is something that's unique. Generally, you know, we're used to black and white CAD type drawings or hand-drawn drawings, specifically if you build a lot of vintage kits like I do. Nice color scheme, and ooh, that's pretty nice. They have here a nice little poster of the submarine. It's basically the same illustration that's found on the back of the box art, but you know, it's still nice. I appreciate that. And what's cool is it looks like you could frame it once the model's done. You could put it in your office. It has some specs and a lot of cool stuff. Where's the... Oh, here's the instruction sheet. Looks like on the back end is the instruction sheet. I like the color scheme used. Kind of reminds me of the old Nichimo instructions from back in the day. So that's actually a really nice touch. The instructions themselves are modern CAD type drawings. They don't appear to be any type of, you know, like hand-drawn or drafted type things. And the sub itself, again, it's a skipjack. These things are extremely simple, detail-wise. The real one, not so much. The real one's a nuclear-powered submarine. It's quite the opposite of simplistic, but the kit here looks to be one that's fairly straightforward and should be for a very enjoyable build. And here's the sub back into the shop, going through its production phase. At this point here, I'm at the really early portion of this build where I'm securing the hull halves together. Like what was showcased before, the hull is comprised of 4 components. 2 sections for the front and 2 for the rear. The way the model is designed is that you have to first connect the upper and lower portions together prior to the main marriage of these 2 sections. The reason why the sub is designed in this format is probably twofold. First, it's for shipping reasons. Obviously, shipping a model this large is a bit problematic, so they needed to find a way to condense it so it fits in this really tiny box. The other reason is also for economics. If anyone has ever worked in designing injection molded plastic molds before, you'll know that this is a very costly venture, and the larger the molds, the more expensive the tooling, thus more expensive the final casting pieces, unless of course you're producing tens of millions of these things, but that's really out of the scope of this video. In order to secure everything together, I'm using my tried and true method, which is using Great Plains Pro Thick CA as my main adhesive. This is the same adhesive that I use on all of my plastic models, regardless of scale, and it's also the same stuff that I use on my 1/6 scale models and my metal armor tech tanks included. Do not use, at all costs, the red tube Tesser's model glue. Save yourself some trouble. That stuff is junk. Just don't use it at all. And some other people like to use plastic cements or lacquer thinners for their models' plastic purposes. I was never really a fan of that stuff. I just don't get what all the hubbub is. Honestly, it just never worked for me. I always found it to be less than desirable. So for me, I'm just going to roll with CA. On the upper and lower halves here, they do connect together, but there isn't any securement type method. There's no like positive clicking type system in order to get these pieces in place. Basically, there's just a tongue type system where you add the glues in place and you secure it in this manner, and you have to clamp it down to make sure that the parts don't move. I can't stress this enough. If the parts move on you, it's not going to set right and your model is not going to be able to be assembled very easily. So this is one thing to really watch out for, and it's something that some beginners out there might struggle with. The top portion here is a little bit different than the bottom because there is this little key notch system, but there's no positive engagement on this. It just basically just sits there, and you have to just make sure that the glue's set in the appropriate manner. This is one of those things where you add the glue, you clamp it in place, make sure and double and triple check, making sure everything is exactly where it needs to be. You then carefully set this aside somewhere quiet in the shop and let it dry. And you got to really, really, really let the glues set and dry on this before you can progress and do anything else. This is really the biggest hurdle on this entire build outside of the bodywork that I'll touch upon in a moment. Here are the 2 hull segments just prior to their assembly. Other than that quirk that I'm going to touch upon in a second, the other thing to mention is that each of these segments have 2 large burrs that are found on these 2 sections here. These are obviously left over from the mold making process where they go ahead and snip off the remainder of the sprue in order to get the things into their package. This is easily addressed with a file, some sandpaper, as well as an X-Acto knife. Just some polishing is all that's required to make the component nice and smooth, which is very important to do at this stage because this will come into effect later when the hull halves are together and you need to do some body work. Another tip I want to mention involves the leading edges on both the interior as well as the exterior sections. There really isn't any flash in the traditional sense, and it's not really a burr, but there's just this small little rib found on all of these sections, probably with the way the molds are designed. And this little rib is best removed with just running an X-Acto knife up and down these sections. The material simply just cuts away, and once removed, these sections will go together in an easier manner. So it's one thing I definitely do recommend. Back to the quirk that I was mentioning before, if I take the rear section and connect it to the front section, you will quickly see that there appears to be a problem. At quick glance, it looks like that the rear portion of the hull has a different circumference compared to the one on the front. This, by the way, was present on the upper portion as well. However, before anyone panics, this is somewhat of an optical illusion, and that's because the hull here is at its appropriate size. It's just with the way they're molded, or possibly with the way they're shipped, it got squished a little bit, changing the circumference. If I take the piece and bend it outward, you'll see how it will instantly go back to shape. Why this is important is when it comes time for gluing it to the front nose here. Like I stated before, there are no positive clips or connection points that are found on these pieces. It's just basically you just jig it in place and hope for the best. This is where those clamps I mentioned before are going to come in handy. To properly assemble the hull, you will absolutely need to have the following pieces of equipment. At least, bare minimum, 2 of these fairly large clamps, and at least 1 of these wide jaw vice grips. This may look like overkill, but this will really come in to save you when it comes time for the assembly. The use of these tools over here will greatly streamline and simplify your build, and will be one that will be greatly appreciated. So much so that I'm actually going to go ahead and do it on screen. Here I have my tube of super glue. When it comes time for the glue, I'm going to add it to this portion over here, and this is the front area. You can also add, of course, to the tongue found on the rear portion, but I found if you do that, it tends to goop out more from the connection seam, as opposed to doing it with the format that I'm using here. I'm just going to go ahead and add a decent amount of glue to these 2 sections. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and take the rear section, and I'm going to line it up onto the groove. I'm going to start with one end, namely this portion right over here. And you want to make sure that the 2 halves line up in a straight manner, and there's no shift happening right over here. It's a little tricky to do it on camera, but at this point here, I can take my clamp and just clamp that portion right into place. With one of the sides clamped, I can then hold it in this manner, then clamp the other unit directly into place. Once you get the secondary clamp in place, it's now time for the third one, which is going to be mounted somewhere in the middle section here of the hull. This is done in order to make sure that the top portion of the circumference lines up perfectly. Otherwise, you may have some oblonging going on, and it may require some more body work. This is where the vice grip comes in handy. You need the wide jaw format version so that you can get right into here and clear the walls of the hull, and yet still be able to make contact with the middle section. You want to adjust the vice grip accordingly. You don't want it to be too tight, but you also don't want it to be too loose. Just to the point where it just clicks in place with a minimum amount of effort, like we have it there. If you move to the outside, you can see that there's a little bit of oozing happening, but not too bad. And you can see that the hull lines line up pretty good. On the inside, I'm going to add a little bit more super glue, just on the center seam here, to really reinforce this, because this has to be absolutely rock solid, or else it will lead to issues as time goes on. With this all out of the way, I'm now going to set this aside somewhere quiet in the shop, where I can let the glues fully set and dry. Once that's out of the way, I can then proceed to the next phase of the assembly. Starting with the detailing found on the lower hull, with everything painted and weathered, you get to see what it looks like in better light. Here we have the lower portion of the array. Note, it is a lighter color compared to the remainder of the lower hull, and this is something that was lifted directly from the color chart that was supplied with the kit. Also, we have the anchor, and the anchor is very nicely detailed, like I touched upon before, and again, it's really unique on these nuclear subs that they have this shape to them, as opposed to the traditional anchor shape that we all know of. From the anchor takes us to the lower hull vents. These are basically left untouched from the stock kit because it's not RC or anything. I don't have to hog them out or replace them in any way, shape, or form. The details are nicely rendered, but in order to further highlight them, during the finishing of the build, I took the Tamiya panel line accent color, which is the black version that they make, and I went ahead and just brushed it into the various locations that you see here. The panel line accent does a really good job in making the vents look deeper compared to the way they are molded on the model. As a final touch-up, during the weathering phase with some flat black in my airbrush, I just went ahead and added a little dab to each of the locations, just giving them a little bit more highlight. This is also seen on the remainder of the molded-in lower hull details that you can see here. Moving the model forward, you get to see the photo etch components now fitted, and again, this was a very nice bit of detailing that's supplied with the Mobius kit. With the camera backed out, you also get to see the bodywork that was completed on the hull, or actually you can't see the bodywork because it was done in a very seamless manner. Of course, like I stated before, the hull is in 4 pieces, and this was basically the majority of the build was, dealing with the panel lines. But you'll also see that the 2 provisions for mounting on the kit stand were thoroughly deleted as well. By deleting the 2 stand mounts, this is another way to improve the accuracy of your model, as opposed to having those unsightly protrusions found on the bottom. Now, although some people might argue, yeah, but John, the stand's going to be plugged into them, so it doesn't really, hurt the look all that much. Me, in my opinion, I don't like those type of things found on the bottom of my ship model, so I just went ahead and polished them off to the way that you see it here. Of course, with the removal for the kit stand provisions, you are going to need to come up with a new way to mount the model to a stand. The stand that we see here is made from my own resin castings. Basically, the stand is a copy from the 1/72nd scale Revell Gato stand that is supplied with that kit. A number of years ago, my father and I went ahead and duplicated the main portions of the stand in order to make our own stands because, well, we have a lot of submarines in the house, and the Revell stand is actually a really nicely designed stand. The 2 endpoints are casted in resin, and the 2 tube sections are just 2 sections of PVC pipe that are cut to shape and then mounted to the provisions that are found on the castings themselves. Once you're complete, you have a nice sturdy stand, which is very low profile, it's very light, and it does the job extremely well. Another ship modeling trick I want to point out involves the stand, and you'll notice that on the 2 portions that we have here, I have them covered with blue painter's tape. This was done to protect the lower hull from getting scratched on the locations where the hull makes contact with the stand. This is something that can easily happen with basic handling, and this isn't necessarily true for things that are radio controlled. I'm talking about just basic moving of the model around your cabinet or display case, or if you ever have to dedust it or anything along those lines. By adding the tape here, it's a good way to prevent any sort of marring that can happen to your model's finish. One thing to watch out for is the use of materials that are rubber or possibly a styrofoam type nature, because these can actually melt into the surface, causing further problems compared to just paint scratching. All of these negative things are just not present with the use of blue painter's tape. Moving afterward takes us to the stern of the model, bringing us to the propeller. The prop is the kit supplied unit, and like I stated before, it's a very nicely rendered and executed piece. So much so that the need for an aftermarket component is just not necessary, specifically if you're building your model static like the one that you see here. The majority of the work that went into the propeller was really with the paint. In order to paint it, I went ahead and spray painted the whole unit with gold over-the-counter spray paint, and then I added via the airbrush several washes, giving it this dulled out, subdued look that you see here. Of course, something like this would have this type of look when exposed to the environment that this propeller would be present in, being of course seawater. This is one thing that I noticed on several other builds out there, not just with submarines, but with surface ships as well, where they'll have the lower hull weathered in a configuration like you see here, or possibly even more, but the propellers will be shiny gold brass, and this is something that's definitely anachronistic and can hurt the look of your build. Of course, if anyone's wondering, the propeller can't freely rotate, and again, it's just one of the attributes that are found in this model that makes it a nicely engineered kit. From the propeller, this brings us to the anti-corrosion zinc plates. Just like with many other vessels, the Skipjack class features several zinc plates that are secured to the rear portion of the hull in order to mitigate some corrosion. Plates are very nicely detailed, and in order to paint them, all I had to do was paint them off of the model. The pieces are spray painted with my silver aluminum spray paint coloring, and then I went ahead and weathered them with a black wash like you see here. Once everything was painted and weathered, it was then secured to the hull in the format that you see here. Moving up further takes us to the rear tail fin, specifically the top-mounted beacon. The beacon is absolutely important on these vessels because with the way they are shaped, basically all of this is under the waterline and is not visible. And if you're in a small boat, you can easily crash into this portion, specifically at night, which is why all of these submarines with this type of a hull design have a beacon found on the top portion of the tail fin, just letting you know, yo, there's a tail fin here, don't crash into it. The beacon detailing is integrally molded into the kit, and the only thing you need to do as a builder is brush it with a little bit of silver paint. And on this one here, I also added a drop of clear lacquer over it just to give it a little bit more of a sheen. One other thing I want to touch upon on the rear are with the kit's functionality pieces, like the rear dive planes, which are fully functional. Although you'll notice they tend to want to just drop in the place that you see here just due to the size and weight of them. A small little drop of white glue can help stiffen this up, but for this build here I didn't think it was really necessary. The rudder itself is also fully functional in that it can pivot side to side. And again, it's just another example on how nicely engineered this kit is. Bouncing back periodically to the bodywork takes us to the waterline. Like what was showcased before, the kit originally has a waterline that's integrally molded in, and it's a pretty deep ingress found in the moldings. Like I stated before, I'm not really a fan of this, so on this model here, I went ahead and deleted the waterline seam that was present. This was done with red putty, and was the exact same red putty that I was utilizing for the remainder of the bodywork, namely for joining all the four halves together. The seam line as well as the waterline removal work was all accomplished at the same time with basically just using sandpaper and going down the surfaces with both dry and wet sanding in order to leave the appearance that you see here. The molded in waterline is not just present on the hull, but it's also present on the rear tail fin as well. It's found in the midsection, and again, it was just removed with the red putty with the same technique that I touched upon before. Moving forward takes to the rear hatch as well as the rear marker buoy. The only thing that I want to mention is that on these sections here I added some extra details, namely the 4 lift rings found on the rear hatch, as well as a small little lift ring that is present on the marker buoy. What's interesting to point out is that the kit does have these provisions mounted, or I should say integrally molded to the kit, but no reference of them are mentioned in the instructions. Basically, all you gotta do is with a small pin vise is drill these areas out and bend a little wire to the shape of U-hooks for these 4 sections, and make a small little eyelet for the marker buoy. This is a simple way to improve the look of your model as opposed to just leaving it stock. These components are actually really important, specifically on the rear hatch, because I believe this is how a rescue buoy, or I should say a rescue chamber, can be secured to the top portion of the hatch in case an emergency happens and you need to get the crew out. These hooks are present not just on this vessel here, but are also present on all of the previous class of submarines, namely the Gato, the Ballo, the Tench, as well as the submarines that came after the Skipjack. And here you can see some of the axis hatches and panels that are found on the top deck. One mod that I made to this model is that on all of the axis panels, I went ahead and added the little fastener holes that are found on these plates. But the way the kit is, it's molded flat without any of these provisions that are present. On the real submarine, however, these are held in place via countersunk fasteners. In order to mimic this on the model here, I just simply took my pin vise with a small Dremel bit and I went ahead around the edges and added the following holes. This is another way to improve the look of your model. One other thing I want to mention involve these 4 panels that we see here. These are left totally stock, and in case anyone wonders what they are, these are the cleats that secure the submarine to a dock or a pier when it makes port. The way they work is that they actually flip over, and when they do, you have the cleat exposed, which then allows you to tie the ropes to it. When the submarine is out at sea, these flip over, making for a nice smooth surface, which cuts down on any sort of drag that this thing would encounter when going on the water. It is a very clever design, and it's one that is found on all of these teardrop-shaped American submarines. Along with the cleats, there's also a spool that would pop up in this location here, and I believe there's also another one found on the front for the reasons that I just mentioned. Moving forward takes us to the most iconic bit of detailing found on the Skipjack class, and that is this dorsal hump that we see here. The purpose of this hump is to conceal the diesel engine's exhaust and air manifold plumbing. This is going to sound really strange, but although the USS Skipjack class is a nuclear-powered submarine, it still has a diesel-electric system found on board. This is true for not just the Skipjack class, but for every single U.S. nuclear submarine class that came afterwards, from the Permit, the Sturgeon, to even the Seawolf and the Virginia classes of today. The purpose of the diesel engine is really more or less as a redundancy and as a backup in case anything were to fail with the nuclear reactor. In fact, this design here is a direct carryover from the World War II class of boats, like the Gato, the Ballo, and the Tench. Only on those vessels, you don't really see the plumbing because everything is concealed under that decking that we have on those pattern of boats. In fact, if you've ever been to any of those surviving vessels like the Bacuna, the Ling, or the Pampanito, and if you stand on the deck in a certain way, you will actually be able to see all of the plumbing emerge from the section here of the lower hull, run along the body, and then enter into this rear portion here of the sail. Something else that was a carryover from the legacy classes was with the way the induction and snorkel system operate. This is taken directly from the U.S. fleet snorkel and guppy converted fleet boats that were still in service and being modernized at that time. And of course, yes, that design traces back to the German Type 21s, which were captured and studied in order to implement them on our own boats, but the point still stands. The system still operates in the exact same way. On the front portion here, we notice there's this small little angle recess. This is your air induction. This actually breathes oxygen in, where it flows in through this tube, goes into the dorsal, and then eventually down into the hull, into the diesel where it breathes it. The exhaust smoke then emits from the diesel is piped up through the manifold, of course, out through the dorsal, up the stack, and then out through the rear portion here of the exhaust manifold. Well, this is extremely important because when you're weathering one of these, you want to be sure to add some exhaust soot smoke on these two locations found on the rear section of the exhaust manifold outlet. This is true again for not just the USS Skipjack class, but also for every single American nuclear submarine that came afterwards. If you're building a Seawolf, you're going to want to do that as well. In fact, the Seawolf actually has these slits here found on the top of the sail where the smoke vents out, but I'm digressing. Back to the lower portion of the dorsal, one thing that's nice about the Mobius kit is that they went ahead and molded the cooling vent slit here nice and hollow. And you can also see the little ribs which are used to support the inner structure, and they make contact with the top of the hull. This is a very nice piece of detailing and is one that would of course be found on the Skipjack class. As for the vent, this was done in order to aid with cooling of the exhaust manifold because obviously it gets really hot, but also it helps vent out the water or any trapped air that can be found in this section over here when the submarine were to dive. On that note, on the top portion here, the dorsal, you can see a row of limber holes. These are present on the kit but are molded solid. Well, one quick way to improve the kit is with a pin vise and a small Dremel bit. You just simply drill these sections out to the way you see it here. Moving towards the bow of the model, basically same type of features that I mentioned before. We have the flipped over cleats, nothing really much to talk about there. Here we have the front entry hatch as well as the front marker buoy, and just like with the other ones, the little hooks were fabricated and added to their appropriate locations. Of course, leads us to the front bow sonar system. Again, the kit has this component nicely molded on, and I just simply painted it in the configuration that you see here, which was taken from the color chart supplied with the model. A similar thing was also done, of course, with the marker buoys. On this model here, they're painted in orange. This is something, by the way, that you have a lot of flexibility with because I've seen a lot of different renditions out there or examples of the real submarine, and these can be a multitude of different colors, from being painted all black to having the marker buoys painted in red, as well as even, there's probably a few different other color variations to the front sonar section. So again, there's a lot of variations to the builder, and depending on which version of the Skipjack you're doing, either a different sub or possibly one of the many refits that this boat received over the years, you do have some options available for the use of painting. From the hull takes us back to the sail, and one bit of detailing is the flag mast. This is not supplied with the kit, and it's something that I fabricated. On the real submarine, this was something that was removable and basically would lock into place with a cotter pin type system. The component here is just fabricated out of two pieces of metal. We have a thin piece of sheet metal with a sewing pin soldered to it. This basically is exactly what the real one looks like if everyone's seen the up-close pictures that are found on the internet. One thing that is missing sadly at this time here is a small little American flag that I should have in this location, but you know, that's something that I can easily add as time goes on. Directly below the flagstaff is the rear light. This is a clear piece of plastic that's supplied with the kit and simply gets mounted into the appropriate location during the build. On the unit itself, the inside is painted in yellow, which you can probably see glowing from this angle that we have here. Again, this is taken from several of the real examples that I have seen in person. Not so much nuclear submarines, but submarines like the Torsk as well as the Bakuna, they have the exact same type of setup. Moving forward takes us to the conning tower dive planes, which again is probably one of the more iconic bits of detailing found on the Skipjack, and would be so on American submarines up until the Los Angeles class. The units here are assembled out of the box and are fully functional. However, you really want to refrain from messing with them too much, because after a while you will eventually start marring up the finish in this area behind the dive plane. And moving to probably one of the hardest details to get into focus in this entire video, and that would be the horn found right here on the front of the sail. The kit does have this detailing integrally molded in, but it's not really there. It's really just a hole found on the two halves. Fabricating the piece was fairly straightforward. The hole itself I cleaned up a little bit by using a round needle file, and the siren insert was made from a piece of plastic sprue or runner that I had in the trash can. I went ahead, put it on the lathe, sculpted the internal and external shape of the funnel, and then just mounted it in place. You'll also see there's a small little brush guard found here on the front, and this is something that I have seen change on several renditions of the Skipjack. Some had the little guard and sometimes it didn't, so it's really up to the builder's discretion. I added it because with the rendition that we see here with this measure, it had that brush guard in place. The guard itself is made from a small little piece of wire that I went ahead and flattened and then secured it to the location that you see here. Also on the front of the sail, you can see the windows that are present, and this again is another thing where you, the builder, have some flexibility depending on the version of the Skipjack you're rendering. When the Submarine class first was launched, it did have these 4 windows found on either side of the sail. As time goes on, this area would change, and at some point, probably in the late 70s, early 80s, this window here was completely deleted altogether, and I believe you only had 1 of these windows that were left. On the model here, the windows were just mounted as per the kit. They were a very simple install. For the adhesive, I actually went with white glue as opposed to my standard adhesives, because if I use super glue on that, you're going to have a nice white haze on the part, which is something that you want to avoid. And the white glue is a nice unintrusive way to secure clear plastic parts to models like you see here. Obviously, if the thing was radio controlled, that would not be the glue of choice. I'd probably use the waterproof glue, but you know, for this one here, the white glue is perfectly suffice. Moving upward now takes us to the array mast, and I'm a bit hazy on this, so for any squid out there, I apologize, but keep in mind I am a threadhead, so this is a bit outside my comfort zone. But outside of the exhaust and the induction for the snorkel, we have here an ECM. I believe this might be an SS radar. It's not the SJ or the SD, but again, a little hazy. On this side here, we have the night scope, and adjacent to that is the attack scope, and then there's also a beacon found right here on the front of the sail. On the top portion here, you'll see that the section is closed off. That's actually the bridge, and when the sub is on the surface, these 2 panels open up, a splash shield comes out, and that's where the skipper and the XO could go ahead and stay on the top of the conning tower and basically operate the vessel from the surface. On the array system, the sections are painted in the following configuration. The middle sections are painted with a primer gray type coloring, and then they have some camouflage painted on them. Generally, the camouflage can either be done via paintbrush or a spray gun, depending on, I guess, which yard worked on the boat last. But they always have this weird amoeba type squiggle pattern that are found on these sections. The blotches are painted with a paintbrush on this model here. The top portions are painted black to match the remainder of the submarine. While on the periscope mast, this leads us to something that I've been wanting to point out for a long time now, and it's a mistake that I've seen on just about every single submarine model that's out there. And that has to do with the way the attack scope and the night scope are painted. Not so much with the top portions. Those are pretty straightforward. They're painted primer, and the lenses are painted, and they have their lacquer brush on, all that good stuff. No, the part that just about everyone out there makes a mistake with are with the masts, and specifically how they're painted. You see, the masts are made from 2 different type of metals, and it's actually very noticeable if anyone has seen one of these subs in real life. The attack scope staff is painted with the same coloring that I used over here on the Induction, which is the silver aluminum color that I've touched upon in a few other videos. However, the night scope is a darker color compared to the other two. A number of years ago, a good color I would have recommended would have been Model Master Jet Exhaust, but sadly, that's no longer an option because Jet Exhaust is no longer made because Model Master decided to throw in the towel. In its place, I actually went on a journey to try to figure out just what color I can use to paint the night scope here. And the color I came up with was Vallejo Silver, but I added a few drops of black to it in order to tint it to the color that you see here. By doing this, you can clearly see the difference between the materials on the night scope in comparison to the attack scope. Outside of the periscopes, this takes to the beacon. The beacon is this orange color that you see here. And of course, outside of adding the orange, I hit it with a couple coats of clear gloss lacquer, again to give it a little bit more sheen, like I mentioned before on the beacon found on the rear rudder. Moving to the paint and the markings, this is something where a lot of people probably are surprised with how much variations you have out there for a submarine of this type. A lot of people think, well, nuclear-powered submarines, they're pretty boring. They're just, you know, all black or black and red, and that's basically it. Well, that's not necessarily the case, specifically for the 1950s and 60s time frame. During this era, the U.S. Navy still had measures for their submarines, and the Skipjack here is not excluded from that. As you can see, this model here has a dual-tone camouflage scheme where the majority of the upper hull is painted in black, but the sail has its side panels airbrushed with a dark gray coloring. This is a common pattern that was utilized at this time. In fact, there were several variations of it where they used different shades of primer gray in order to achieve a similar effect. There are also several other painting variations out there where I've seen the entire upper hull painted in a dark gray. I've seen the same scheme with a black trim, without black trim. I've seen the red go all the way up to the waterline, halfway to the way you see here. So, again, there are lots of variations out there in order to paint what is generally considered to be a very basic and plain submarine. For the actual application of the paint, well, this is one aspect that warships are really simple in this regard, and submarines specifically. The entire model itself is spray painted in red oxide spray paint, as well as just Ralcan El Cheapo flat black spray paint. No other fancy other type of colors were used. The red I got from Ace Hardware, and the flat black is, again, the 97-cent can from Home Depot. The color for the measure, that was airbrushed on, and that was a Model Master color, I believe Schwarzgrau or something along those lines. For the weathering, I went with something that wasn't too over the top. I wanted to have the model look like where it's been in the water for a little bit of time, but not so much time where you get to see things like biofouling or barnacles start growing onto the sections of the lower hull. If you'll look here, you'll see, of course, the waterline has a nice little bathtub ring around it. I added some light green in there for algae, but then below the waterline you can see that the algae starts growing, but growing in a darker coloring. This is important because algae color does differ depending on how far it is from the surface of the water. The darker shade was painted with Tamiya NATO green, I think, or olive green. It was done with the airbrush. And then for the bathtub ring, this was done with a paintbrush as well as a little bit of dry brushing in order to get that smearing effect. Of course, the same thing is also done on the rear tail fin that I showed earlier. Outside from the waterline, I also added some streaking found on the top sections, both of just white line streaking as well as also some rust streaking. White line streaks are basically, sections of water that would have been drying on the surface, and it forms a nice little salt streak. The rust actually forms from some fasteners or possibly a well bead or two, where it begins to corrode on the surface, and then after a while, after enough water passes through it, it begins to develop a little streak. Something else I want to mention involves the color itself. For the model, I spray painted all with flat black. Now, when the submarines are brand new, apparently the Navy utilizes a gloss black for this coloring. But keep in mind, the gloss black does not last long at all. After a short period of time in the water, either out at sea or possibly even at dock, the gloss tends to dull out very quickly from the UV exposure as well as also to the saltwater exposure. So this is something else to consider when you're rendering one of these builds. One other thing that I want to say in terms of weathering, this is something that I've been holding back for many years now, is a lot of guys, they tend to over-weather their warships. I'm talking about not necessarily submarines, but surface ships as well. I've seen models out there where the thing looks like a complete utter rust bucket. Now, this is not necessarily inaccurate, because if the vessel's been out at sea for a long duration or a long deployment, by the time it comes back, it's going to be pretty bad with rust, okay? It's made out of steel, you're out in salt water and UV all day long, you're going to get rust. So much so that even the skippers themselves would opt to go in sometimes at night because it looks bad on them when they show back up to port and the thing looks like crap. So that is something to consider. However, the problem is it tends to be overdone, or it's using techniques that just don't look that good. Also, there's a problem with inconsistency, right? I've seen a lot of these heavily weathered builds where from the waterline up, it looks like a rusty tin can. However, from the waterline down, the thing is totally clean. So if you're going to weather it, you better weather it right. You know, if you're going to rust it all the way. You know, make the bottom as crappy looking as the top. But if you're going to weather heavily, you better have the biofouling to go with it, okay? The things out at sea, it's not just going to rust and rust exclusively. You're going to have biofouling. You're going to have the salt line on the waterline. You're going to have algae on the waterline, and most importantly, that lower hull is going to be encrusted with barnacles and every other type of biomass you can think of. So if you're going to weather it heavily, make it look like it just came back to port, you better have the other weathering to go with it besides just slapping a bunch of rust on the side of your model. Rant over. Outside of that, back to the model here, the markings that are supplied were used, and they're just standard water slide decals. They went on without any problems and are pretty decent in quality. The entire model was then coated in VMS varnish for the same reasons that I mentioned on my tank builds. And this now leads us to skill level and recommendation. The model itself is very easy to put together, so much so that, yeah, a beginner can actually tackle one of these. Granted, a beginner's probably going to have a little difficulty with trying to get the upper and lower hulls to fit in that 4-piece assembly, and they're specifically probably going to have a little bit of difficulty with deletion of the seams. However, having said that, the actual assembly itself, this thing here is extremely simple. It's probably simpler than most of the simple tank kits that I've reviewed on this channel. Obviously, anyone with intermediate to advanced skills can easily build one of these models. They make for a very quick and simple build, specifically for following the out-of-the-box parts like I did by the most part on this one here. The model itself, I had it built in probably about 2 or 3 days' time, and that's with the dry time factored in. However, this is with the caveat that you're building the model as a static build like I did here. If you're trying to build this thing radio controlled, this is going to change the ballgame a bit, and if you're a beginner, you might want to steer clear from this and possibly consult some RC sub forums to see what works best for you. For recommendations, obviously if anyone's a huge fan of submarines and warships, this kit here is a complete no-brainer. It is a nice, gorgeous size, so much so that I couldn't film this in my standard filming area because of just how big this model actually is. And even with that, it's still a little bit smaller compared to the Revell Gato kit that I touched upon several times in this video, even though it's still a nice size model. If you're a collector of post-World War II American U.S. vessels, obviously the Skipjack is another good choice to add to your collection. If you're a fan of American submarines, the Skipjack here is a very influential and important boat, and is one that, again, would be appreciated in your collection. If you already have the other 1/72nd scale subs that are on the market, be it the Revell Germany Type 7, the Type 9s, as well as the Gato class, well, the Skipjack here would be another nice addition to add to your collection. Also, as a no-brainer, this one here is a really good choice to RC. Although it's out of the scope of this video, this sub here has been RC converted by a number of individuals on YouTube as well as also on the forums, and it makes for a fantastic platform to do it to. Also, unlike some of the older kits on the market, this one here costs less than some of the RC kits that are floating around that are made out of fiberglass, and again, it's just a really good contender for your RC conversion project. After building this one here, I could definitely see myself acquiring more from my own personal collection. The models are very affordable and are still relatively easily come by. On top of that, there are several versions of the Skipjack out there with just the other vessels that were in the class itself, which of course are all given to you on the decal sheet. So I might be expanding my Navy quite a bit as time goes on. However, one thing that I do want to admit, and I'd be lying if I said otherwise, was that when I was done building this model here, I did have a little bit of regret in that the only sub-kit that Mobius has in their 1/72nd scale lineup is the Skipjack that we have here. It would be really cool if they were to have expanded the line and offered different vessels from the same time period. There are a lot of really cool subs out there, such as the Tullabee, the George Washington, the Triton, the Nautilus, the Seawolf. No, not that one. The cool one. Yeah, that one. All of these vessels here would make for some really interesting subject matters rendered in a plastic kit form, specifically in 172. However, until that day comes, I'm going to be fairly content with the Skipjack that I have here. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 1/72nd scale USS Skipjack Fast Attack Submarine. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep update on new posted content, being model showcase videos like this one over here, or the other larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been showcased on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Take care.